It's really, really bad reporting based off of really, really bad evidence. It uses opinion piece type wording to make a suggestion, but not a conclusive, quantitative allegation that there are false narratives being pushed by bad actors. They use the term false narrative to describe what was really a critical conversation, with many people having different opinions as part of it, is the notion that if you critique Taylor Swift and you critique her politics at all, and you have questions about certain things that she's doing, that you are essentially a bot, that you are engaging in ridiculous bot-like behavior. Well, because there's, I guess, nothing better to talk about aside from, the usual imperialism, capitalism, and all that, we should talk about Taylor Swift. Because why not? More specifically, I want to talk about an article that Rolling Stone just put out about the use of bots in Taylor Swift discourse. You see, Rolling Stone, which is a publication with some questionable situations going on regarding its integrity, recently published an article called Taylor Swift's Last Album Sparked Bizarre Accusations of Nazism. It was a coordinated attack. Data analysis of social media posts painting the singer as a Trump supporter or white supremacist revealed a network of inauthentic accounts. Now, right from the jump, I want you to know that, for one, I've been on that apparent side of the Taylor Swift discourse. I had a video previously where I talked about Taylor Swift potentially being MAGA, Taylor Swift going MAGA, I think that's the title of the VOD. I discussed the lyrics from all of her songs from the new album and the implications, the microaggressions, and the eye rolls at play that I thought signaled at the very least some conservative values coming to the fore, or some stuff that reactionaries can seize on. I mean, when you're friends with Trump supporters in real life, notably Brittany Mahomes, and then you put out a song called Good Thing I Like My Friends Canceled, it really leads to people asking questions, right? Well, according to this Rolling Stone article, some of those people asking questions were not people at all, but in fact fake accounts, false accounts that were generated in a sort of narrative attack against Taylor Swift. And what I want you to know is that I, off jump, do think that there are bots participating in this discourse. I think there are bots participating in everything, especially on certain social media platforms like Twitter, where moderation is scant, let's say. Bots can take up to like a quarter or a third of certain engagement. And it's inevitable that even when you agree with them, sometimes they're bots, which is something I don't think a lot of people like to admit. That said, there were aspects of the conversation that, even though I was very harshly critical about Taylor Swift, there were aspects of the conversation that were blown out of proportion a little bit. Sometimes some of the posts gave buzzword, sometimes some of the posts gave not very rigorous. And to be honest, I did feel at times like, okay, there's a couple of bots at play here. That being said, I think the proportion to which a lot of these posts and a lot of this discourse was bot generated is something I would probably contest. And I want you to do this close reading with me of this Rolling Stone article. We'll look at a few passages in particular and analyze whether or not the reporting is good. Just from that standpoint, right? Put aside your biases perhaps and just walk with me as we figure out whether or not this is a good piece of journalism. Then we're going to talk about the implications. So Taylor Swift's last album, Bizarre Accusations of Nazism, it was a coordinated attack. The article in the title is claiming that this was a coordinated attack. It starts off saying this was a marquee event, Taylor Swift's release of Life of a Showgirl in early October. Fans and detractors alike picked its dozen songs apart like forensic investigators, but they went far beyond analysis of the lyrics. People scrutinized the artwork, the merchandise, hunting for Easter eggs, And then the online discussion of the album turned extreme in ways that many found bewildering. You'll notice, like, on Wikipedia, if you do editing, you'll get flagged for using a term like many found bewildering, because it's like, who? You gotta prove who said that. Who is saying that they found it bewildering, right? Nonetheless, sure, some people found it bewildering. There were social media posts accusing Swift of implicitly endorsing the MAGA movement, trad wife gender norms, and even white supremacy with dog whistle references. While the far right have been known to claim the singer as an icon of Aryan greatness despite her record of championing Democrats and liberal values. And President Trump himself has blithely and disingenuously shared AI-generated imagery depicting her as a supporter. This is true. This was a noticeably divergent trend, an apparent attempt to cancel Swift for those presumed affiliations. I want to just flag from the beginning that some of the language here already feels a little bit biased. Using a term like cancel Swift for those presumed affiliations is terminology that, and I'm a journalist, more or less would be used in like opinion pieces than in a piece of reporting like this. Because what does it mean to cancel somebody, right? We can have the long discussion about cancel culture and who really sees any real accountability for their actions, how many men have been, accused of certain things, but actually haven't had to deal with any prison time or lose many opportunities, if any. Some of the wording is also purporting that this discourse was entirely out of the blue, especially anything construing her as being affiliated with white supremacy or just being racist in any way, which strikes me as odd because in my recollection, this is a conversation that's been happening on and off for several years. People have long questioned whether or not Taylor Swift's politics are really true, whether or not she actually stands by those, liberal values. And it's true that at times she does endorse them. She'll be pro-gay sometimes. She has supported different Democratic candidates, though usually in pretty small ways in terms of her output, in terms of what she says, not in terms of she never really canvasses, right? And it's true that she has some affiliations with people who are MAGA. Like, again, Brittany Mahomes, also Dave Portnoy, is somebody that she thanked publicly for showing her support. And it's been rumored that her boyfriend, Travis Kelce, who said that it would be an honor for President Trump to go to the Super Bowl or whatever, something along those lines, you can fact check me, is potentially a Trump supporter as well. So suggesting that she might be cozy with certain MAGA people is honestly not outlandish at all. And critiquing her for her politics and her social stances is not outlandish at all because every artist gets that. Every single artist gets scrutinized. That's what social critique of art is supposed to be about. You're supposed to factor in the politics behind it, the messaging, the values proposed by the art, and then say, okay, what kind of thing is this telling us? What kind of messaging is this giving us? But, already as you start this article from Rolling Stone, you get this sense like doing this, according to this journalist, is itself so outlandish that it's worth investigating. Okay, well, these ridiculous charges Again, very loaded language, no? Led Swifties to bemoan the current political climate, admonishing left-leaning commentators for going overboard in their attempts to identify signs of crypto-fascism in Swift's work. It's depressing because reactions like these end up making everyone who genuinely cares about social progress look ridiculous, wrote one fan on Reddit. The more exaggerated the discourse becomes, the more it plays directly into the right's narrative that liberals are hysterical, moralizing, and incapable of nuance. What Swift's defenders didn't realize, however, was that they were pushing back against a false narrative that had been seeded and amplified by a small network of inauthentic social accounts. Worse, they were helping to disseminate those bad faith allegations by earnestly engaging with them. So before I get into this and these claims, again, there's no contestation. There's no presentation of, the other side, of which there is a vast amount of people, including many social media content creators with significant profiles, who were like, no, this isn't ridiculous. This isn't exaggerated. This isn't playing into the right's narrative. It's just fair critique. So it's clear that there's a bias from the journalist, right? The language that they're using is very obviously telling a particular story of the indignant, disappointed, rational Taylor Swift supporter being swarmed by these hysterical narratives, which they are now supposedly about to prove is a false narrative that was seeded and amplified by a small network of inauthentic social accounts, and that they were helping to disseminate those bad faith allegations by earnestly engaging with them. I want you to look at this article and what it claims and evaluate whether or not this is actually proven that there is a false narrative to begin with. And second, that this false narrative was seeded by inauthentic social accounts. And lastly, that even engaging with them earnestly was playing into what they wanted, which sounds suspiciously like the Swiftie argument that, Taylor Swift condemning Trump using her music would only be giving him what he wanted, only be giving him what he wants, which is attention. Which is a bizarre argument to be making about the fucking president of the US, but whatever. This is where it gets really funky for me. That's according to new research from Gudea, a behavioral intelligence startup that tracks how such reputation-damaging claims emerge and go viral on the internet. This is not language that you usually hear in an article about diving into bot accusations or diving into, data. This is the kind of wording that you hear in a promotional article. This is the kind of wording you see in an article that is advertising a company. You'll notice also that the white paper is never released. But they say that in a white paper examining more than 24,000 posts and 18,000 accounts across 14 digital platforms between the 4th and the 18th of October, shared first with Rolling Stone, the firm concluded that just 3.77% of accounts drove 28% of the conversation around Swift and the album during that period. This cluster of evidently coordinated accounts, evidenced by what? Pushed the most inflammatory Swift content, including conspiracy theories about her supposed Nazi illusions, call-outs for her theoretical MAGA ties. They're not theoretical, her friend is MAGA. And posts that framed her relationship with fiancé Travis Kelce as inherently conservative or trad, with all of this framed as leftist critique. There's so much loaded language in here that honestly, it cracks me up. But we should start by talking about Gudea, because clearly this looks like an advertisement for a company called Gudea. And if you look at it, it's a very small company that is an AI company. They're literally using an AI company to make an analysis that proves that bots are behind this criticism of Taylor Swift. And when you look at Gudea.ai, the website of Gudea, you see taglines like foresight for action. It gives teams early visibility into rising narratives, showing what's gaining traction, why it matters, and where conversations are headed. By translating complex online activity into clear, decision-ready intelligence, Gudea helps communicators act sooner, proactively manage risk, and respond with confidence. Oh, we have the article. We have the paper. Okay, so retract my statement earlier that we didn't have the paper. So this is Gudea's paper about the life of a showgirl. You see some of the things that are already said. The executive summary says that in 25,000 posts, essentially from 18,000 users across 14 platforms, there was a polarized online environment shaped by a mixture of organic cultural discourse, symbolic reinterpretation, and targeted inauthentic activity. So already we're noting that there's some authenticity in this conversation, and then there's some that's inauthentic. Right. So what is the inauthentic narrative? What is the inauthentic activity? They use the word inauthentic to describe narratives played in triggering authentic engagement, including the false narrative that Taylor Swift was using Nazi symbolism. Now, did Taylor Swift use Nazi symbolism? This is all revolving around a pendant where if you look at it, it kind of looks like there are lightning bolts on the pendant that was part of her merch for her album. And those lightning bolts kind of look like the SS symbol. Now, a lot of the people who were pointing this out were saying, this feels off. This seems like it could be a dog whistle. They were not claiming she's a Nazi and this is her proclaiming her being a Nazi. Some were. And I think it's pretty fair to say that that's a false narrative because you'd have to really put up some evidence to back that she is, quite clearly signaling to Nazi supporters, that she is a Nazi. But questioning the imagery used in a piece of merchandise is not a narrative at all. It's a process, it's a critique, it's an analysis. Again, something that many people, not just Taylor Swift, are subject to in the public eye. So construing that whole conversation, which ultimately turned out to be kind of a nothing burger, in my opinion, construing that whole conversation as a false narrative being pushed about her is really poor wording. And that wording is important because it's used as the basis through which you can then identify, in this case, in the Gudea study, who's doing bot activity and who's not. Because if they're posting about this and using certain terms, now we can flag that as bot activity because we've just established that that's a false narrative. We didn't establish that it's a critique or a conversation. We've strictly categorized it as a false narrative, right? Don't forget the links, but yeah, it's definitely questionable. It was like 88 links or something, right? I don't think the lightning bolt necklace was purposeful, but shit like this happens. Asking questions about the visuals is a visual thinking strategy that I used as an art teacher to help students understand visual language, right? And yeah, as some people are pointing out, if people are like, hey, this looks like a Nazi symbol, it would make sense to be like, oh, that's not the intention at all. Let me pull it. Let me change it, right? Regardless, okay, this is the false narrative. So a key finding of this analysis is the inauthentic narratives. This is the false narrative, and it didn't remain confined in fringe conspiratorial spaces. It successfully pulled typical users into comparisons between Swift and Kanye West. This demonstrates how a strategically seeded falsehood can convert into widespread authentic discourse, reshaping public perception even when most users do not believe the originating claim. So I don't think that proves that at all. I think that you've just claimed that something is a false narrative when really it's more like a discourse. You can disagree about how silly the discourse is, but it's a discourse, not a narrative. A false narrative would be Taylor Swift is part of this Nazi organization. And then you look it up and you find that there's no evidence that she's part of the Nazi organization, but the narrative spreads. That's what a false narrative is. It's not, hey, this looks like Nazi symbolism. That's literally just a critique, basic art critique. But this is the anti-intellectualism upon which we are basing the great findings of the study. Another big piece of evidence is that Gudea found a significant user overlap between accounts pushing the Swift Nazi narrative and those active in a separate AstroTurf campaign attacking Blake Lively. This overlap reveals a cross-event amplification network, one that disproportionately influences multiple celebrity-driven controversies and injects misinformation into otherwise organic conversations. This is a lot of buzzwords and big words. A lot of the people who are talking shit about Taylor Swift and calling her a Nazi, or saying that she's Nazi adjacent, or critiquing her for using potential Nazi symbolism, or whatever, are also anti-Blake Lively. And here's the thing. The Blake Lively situation is a mess. I don't know much about it. It's not something that I participated in talking about publicly. I get the sense that there's probably some astroturfing going on against Blake Lively. I also don't like Blake Lively because she got married to Ryan Reynolds on a plantation. Separate conversation. I can see how the overlap, if it's super significant, would be a red flag, because it's like, oh, so these bots are pushing narratives against both of these celebrities at the same time. Again, we'll have a conversation about that in terms of what's really actually revealed. So the data set says it has a multi-layered structure in which cultural commentary, political accusations, symbolic interpretation, and conspiratorial narratives intersect, which sounds like social media. I just don't understand what the methodology is here. It seems as though there's a lot of language to describe how complex the study is, but not a lot to describe the methodology. How do you determine what is a salacious comment or not? What is a false narrative comment or not? That was already flawed. Now you're just looking at, okay, so we're seeing people who are engaging in a particular conversation, and we admit that the majority of users behaved typically, but about 4% exhibited non-typical behavior amplifiers and accounted for 28% of the conversation volume, suggesting coordinated influence. What does this mean exactly? And I'm going to compare this, by the way, in a little bit with similar conversations about Nick Fuentes to show you the difference in an organization with academic backing investigating online coordinated activity and this, which is so far reading like slop, to be honest with you. This is a narrative environment. They're saying 4% of the people engaging accounted for 28% of the conversation volume, and that suggests coordinated influence. What is the conversation volume? Are you just saying that 4% of people were doing 30% of the posting? Because saying accounted for 28% of the conversation volume is seemingly a suggestion that they're the ones anchoring the discourse, because they're making certain claims. They're making certain claims that other people are responding to. That's sort of the narrative that you're setting up. In which case, I would definitely argue that that's not accounting for 28% of the conversation volume, especially because I know that the conversation we're talking about was had by a lot of different people across a lot of different backgrounds who were very clearly not bots. But also, you haven't established that this is a false narrative in the first place. You haven't proven to me at all what was a false claim. You're just saying that certain people were sus. Key findings: inauthentic narratives triggered authentic conversations. So again, it was an inauthentic narrative, and then a lot of people had authentic conversations about it. They controlled the discursive environment by saying things that aren't true. If the conversation was, hey, this symbolism looks off, it looks like Nazi symbolism, then it's not a false claim, it's not a false narrative. You've not proven at all that there was a narrative saying Taylor Swift is a Nazi. You haven't shown us an example post, for instance, of a claim that Taylor Swift is a Nazi engaging in Nazi activities, whatever. You've only been referring to a conversation about whether or not she's used Nazi symbolism. Typical users who were not engaging with conspiracy content nevertheless entered the conversation in response to the fallout created by inauthentic users. Okay, so we still have yet to have proof of why the users are inauthentic. We've seen some generalized discussion of how a small percentage of non-typical behavior influenced the conversation disproportionately, and that it unfolded across major platforms, which created a cross-ecosystem narrative network capable of rapid escalation. That just means there's a lot of room for susness in here. There's a lot of room for suspicion about some of the motives. None of it says there was a false narrative that was pushed by a block of people who are not authentic. Many did so to defend Taylor Swift, criticize the irrationality of the conspiracy. No conspiracy. Again, you've not proven that there's a conspiracy. You've not shown us an example of posts, news articles or anything that says, oh, these are people saying Taylor Swift is a Nazi. And again, you keep bringing up there's a comparison with Kanye West here. Well, yeah, some people would make that comparison because of Taylor Swift's connection with Kanye West, inevitably. What does that have to do with bot activity? The pattern of inauthentic provocation and authentic user discourse is a hallmark of successful narrative manipulation. It's not proven, right? You haven't proven that there's an inauthentic provocation here. Because, for instance, what if it was just a bunch of people who were wrong, who were sincere and wrong? What was inauthentic about their claim? Secondly, where are we seeing a specific false claim? How many times do I have to repeat myself over? Am I repeating myself too much? Deny in the chat. We've decided you're irrational. That's evidence that this is a conspiracy. So you admit that this is a small amount of people. Okay, here are the clusters. 9 major clusters across low, medium, and high risk categories. High risk clusters: Nazi symbolism and conspiracy accusations, political reframing and MAGA allegations, relationship politicization. Me when I talk about your husband potentially being a Trump supporter. Ooh, relationship politicization. So the high risk clusters were part of a dynamic seeded heavily by non-typical accounts and drove downstream effects. So what's the non-typical account? I don't understand. What's the evidence of the non-typical account? What are the outliers? Okay, outliers and fringe accounts began circulating claims that Swift is using Nazi symbolism. I mean, I just feel like all of this is it's just so poorly founded that the rest of the thing feels quite underwhelming. Like, again, even the numbers you're giving me where, this is the peak density of conspiracy activity, where conspiracy posts surged to 74% of the day's narrative share. You haven't proven to me categorically, methodologically, what is a conspiracy post? And then when you look at the audience makeup, like you're saying it's still 90% typical users. This is bad. And this is not academic publishing. That's the thing, Tegan, right? Tegan says everyone pour one out for the state of academic publishing. This is not academically published. Again, this is a company publishing a data sweep that it made. You don't see there's very much at all otherwise from Gudea. It puts out this Taylor Swift paper, which does not have very much academic accountability. And then it gets this boost from Rolling Stone that uses it to say, see, bot activity anchored the conversation. Once the provocations were injected into the Swift discourse, often they appeared in edgier online forums like 4chan or Kiwi forums before migrating to popular social apps. That is the case for a lot of social media discourse. That is not proof of bot activity. There has been zero proof of bot activity, even the usage of the term outlier accounts. So you have 90% typical users and then you have 6% outlier accounts. Like Danae asked, what does outlier mean? These accounts are, potentially bad faith accounts. But we've had this claim in the title that this was a coordinated attack full of inauthentic accounts, though we haven't had a rundown of what makes the accounts inauthentic. Outlier, okay. Show unusual posting habits that don't fit typical patterns. I don't know what that means. That is really vague language. Might have sudden unexplained changes in their social media behavior. That is extremely vague and subjective. Use the platform in unique or unexpected ways. This is the most vague language anybody has ever put in a paper ever. This is some of the worst paper writing you can do. There is no methodology. There is nothing concrete to draw from. It is all vague descriptions, conspiracy posts, false narratives, big sounding things, but there's little description about what quantitatively makes them what they are, what quantitatively makes something a false narrative, what quantitatively makes something bizarre or unusual behavior. Crazy. Certified by the University of Oklahoma. Really poorly done statistical profiling, as Manic Candace posting says, right? And some folks on Reddit, which I do not frequent the Travis and Taylor subreddit very much, okay? But they were, of course, some of the people that were particularly critical of this work. You have one person who said that they worked on a major multinational tech PR agency's machine learning sentiment analyzer tool in 2014-ish, and it was used to similarly prop up whatever theory they wanted to support, whatever position a client wanted to take. The tool did not work well. They point out that they still work in tech and that the skewing of things for PR purposes seems to be worse 10 years later, that the company description for Gudea uses the language of DevOps, cybersecurity, about threat vectors, advanced detection, etc. to give legitimacy to what is likely just sentiment analysis. Okay, that's what we got, sentiment analysis of what people are feeling, of the general vibe. From a web scraper, which is a type of program that you can run that just runs you, within a data set for specific categorization according to what you're looking for, combined with some speculative modeling. It's possible AI isn't even doing the modeling because they do not show any data samples at all, even in their white paper. We just have to trust that somewhere the AI did it. You can write a white paper that actually shows graphs and anonymized data versus a document that we just have to fully trust you on, but I digress. And they point out that there are a lot of AI grift startups that actually hard code or use overseas labor instead of actual AI. Ask me how I know. I also considered whistleblowing at a real tech company that similarly advertised AI but had hard coded all their demos. You don't need AI to do this kind of analysis. You can do it with a vanilla JavaScript web scraper written by a 13-year-old and then plot trends in Excel. You can even do this by writing a shitty JS extension in Excel. The use of AI here is to make it sound like this analysis is fancier, more complicated, and more scientific than it actually is. Which, ironically, for a lot of us, works to the opposite effect, because the fact that it's supposedly using AI makes it even more susceptible to all kinds of errors, as we know how AI things work. The person looked into the company. The CEO has a background in political campaigns. Data mining voters is my guess. And the military. The white paper is written in what I would call military report style and not a white paper from a tech company. It's possible this guy is a good guy trying to develop tools to help detect threats against democracy, but without actual data showing their tool in action and proof this isn't just two underpaid dudes in the Congo doing AI on contract. My speculation is this report is a puff piece paid by her agency with the intent to pull in VC dollars to this startup. So yeah, looking into Gudea more, it's a privately held company in Columbia, Maryland, venture capital funded. Where are our infos about the founders? On LinkedIn, Gudea's description is control the narrative. That's their tagline. It's right here. The name is giving Israeli, not gonna lie. It does kind of give Israeli, right? The storm tracker for the internet. It's 11 to 50 employees with 10 associated members. These are the people who work at Gudea. Okay, I have no time to do the tagline giving Israeli too, probably. Again, I'll go back to this Redditor, and you can trust their background or you can not. But I'm really kind of fascinated by the analysis that they did. They scraped some data, they say, from social media, which ones who knows, divided users and their posts into a spectrum of bad to good actors. Based on AI magic, trust them, they determined the allegations of MAGA/Nazism/ etc. was started by a subset of unusual users. Thus, the conversation was started artificially by who and why, who knows. Because, yeah, the Rolling Stone report says, we don't have any information about who's doing this. Presley and his team don't know the identity of the individual or group behind this attack, but they did discover that overlap with people posting about Blake Lively. Sorry, I have a bunch of posts here. They divided the users into different categories depending on posting behavior. You are suspect in this report if you have a large following and start a campaign, not defined, show unusual habits outside of your posting norms, get a lot of likes/shares. This could include a very large amount of people. Let me see if I can see the wording about the following. This is the most scrolly episode. Yeah, a power player. Combine high popularity with strategic coordinated posting behavior, have a large engaged following, and also show organized campaign-like activity. And then what are they saying about the power players in this paper? The remaining 3.77% disproportionately shaped discourse volume. Adding the Blake Lively overlap shows that networked user communities can exert cross-event influence. Outliers and influencers from one narrative appear prominently in another. These users do not behave uniformly. They shift personas depending on topic, platform, and narrative tension. The tiny but consistent presence of power players shapes narrative direction in both datasets despite their extremely small population. Is this paper just like proving that influencers have influence? Is that what it's trying to say? That content creators with large followings shape discourse? Did I need this fucking paper to point that out to me? I must be a bot. That must be what it is. I'm a bot. I had a large following. I had never posted about Taylor Swift before. And then all of a sudden I did. And I used the term MAGA and tradwife in the title and in the video. I must be a bot. And I just didn't realize it. I must have been an inauthentic account that drove the conversation narratively towards false narratives and conspiracies. That must have been what it was. They also divided the discourse by day, what topics trended when. How do they determine what normal baseline posting is for 18K people with only 24K posts? That's not even 2 posts a person, unless they are comparing with another undisclosed data set. They mentioned comparing users involved in Blake Lively's convo and cross-referencing if they were talking about Taylor, because apparently that can be suspicious if the posts are weird/campaign-like. They conclude that the Nazi symbolism and general MAGA allegations are because of a concentrated set of users who introduced the idea to purposely sway public opinion. They note that the methods they use aren't based on keywords, meaning everyone who said Life of a Showgirl or Taylor Swift Plus sucks isn't included necessarily. Instead, they analyzed semantic similarity, which I personally think, but can't definitely say for sure because they don't show their work, is fancy words for we asked AI to do this analysis of text for us and did not manually input a bunch of keywords. Both approaches to web scraping, semantic LLM-based determination and keywords, can be problematic and wrong. AI is notoriously biased, and while it can do sentiment analysis, it doesn't show its work either because it is an LLM, aka word predicting machine. Okay, so I've scraped through this for a while, but here's the overall analysis. It's bad, right? It's not really good analysis at all. There is not anything proving the heft of the claims being made, especially in the title, that there was a coordinated attack. They didn't prove coordination between accounts. They didn't show that activity between the accounts shows that they followed each other, shows them from being from the same location. They didn't disclose anything about the posting patterns of these posters, so we don't know what they're looking at that's making them determine that these are outlier accounts. We don't even know if when they say outlier accounts, they mean bots or that they mean a specific team that was hired to create false flag accounts. There's such little specificity. They use the term false narrative to describe what was really a critical conversation, with many people having different opinions as part of it. Basically, there's nothing done to evidence that there was a false claim centrally made, that there were accounts that all coordinated together at the same time with the same language to purport that false claim, that those accounts would then have any kind of connection with each other, and that those accounts would have any type of inauthentic background that we should know about. Essentially, all that the paper shows us is that, hey, some of this stuff was kind of sus. Usually up to like 5, 6, 7% of the time on certain days, some of the posts seemed kind of sus. That is not the same thing as saying these bizarre accusations of Nazism were part of a coordinated attack. But what this is put out to support is the notion that if you critique Taylor Swift and you critique her politics at all, and you have questions about certain things that she's doing, that you are essentially a bot, that you are engaging in ridiculous bot-like behavior. The article is literally boosting opinions from Swifties, saying that this kind of discourse has a negative effect on the left, it's masquerading as leftist critique, etc. It uses opinion piece type wording to make a suggestion, but not a conclusive quantitative allegation that there are false narratives being pushed by bad actors. It's really, really bad reporting based off of really, really bad evidence. I can point out to you several examples of real authentic users who you may or may not agree with, who had huge posts about Taylor Swift. This was a huge viral sound by a very real content creator who makes music and does comedy.
I'm not a black bitch, and I'm not a savage, but I'm scared that you might cheat on me with a black hood bitch, and she's gonna have a fat ass.
So it's 576,000 likes on this one. You know, you had posts, Taylor Swift is obsessed with black women, Taylor Swift and selective outrage, Kayla Nicole. Like, these are real creators. These are content creators. You can like them or you can dislike them. Posts about wood, Taylor Swift, and, MAGA. There's tons of different content creators who are real content creators who are sharing the opinion that they think Taylor Swift is tacitly MAGA. So even if this data set was more conclusive than it actually was, and the reporting was more journalistic than it actually was, even if that were the case, you still had well more than enough evidence to prove that there is authentic conversation about whether or not Taylor Swift is racist, MAGA affiliated, and in some cases, making Nazi dog whistles. And so the participation of bots in that does not render that entire conversation as inauthentic. But don't tell that to Swifties, right? Don't tell that to Swifties. So there's a lot of people who are pushing back on this. Black people are not bots. This is genuinely pathetic. Weirdest PR move from Taylor yet. We also have some evidence, of course, about Taylor Swift going after people critiquing her online before. So it's not as if accusing her of being complicit in this, of doing this right now, is out of nowhere or outlandish, right? It's kind of insane how easily people fall for smear campaigns against women time and time again. Can't tell what's worse, the fact it was intentionally orchestrated or it worked because many people were unable to think critically and form an opinion outside of viral posts. Regardless, hopefully this confirmation will lead to some internal reflection for those who believed it. Pop Base. The Pop Base tweet about this has some fun quote tweets. Leftists love to talk about spiritually Israeli and Western propaganda, but couldn't even spot a neo-Nazi propaganda movement against a major pop star who has been a Democrat her whole life. First of all, I'm not afraid of you. I don't think neo-Nazi and Democrat are separate things. We're just having a conversation about a particular Latino Democrat being fucking aligned with certain MAGA values. You can see that there's what are y'all trying to say? Let me tell you guys what that was, just so you don't think I'm trolling, because I know that that's a big word salad that I just said. Democratic senators' vile texts leaked what it says about the Dem establishment. You met my party, I've been yelling at them this whole time. There's a couple other ones that I think are really funny. Anyone with a functional brain can understand that this is a well-orchestrated smear campaign. Like, what even is this comment, and why did 33K people like this? Protect the family is so conservative coded, it's giving pure bloods don't mix. Sounds like it was just a joke that you didn't like, bro. That sounds like it was just a joke you didn't like. I'm confused. Why don't I see any of the so-called Twitter activists apologizing and acknowledging that they were wrong? It's almost like it was never about bringing justice, and it was just a way to humble the biggest artists in the world. There's people making points about how they're using scapegoats for their propaganda to divide the left. I am not in the same political block as Taylor Swift, even if Taylor Swift could be construed as completely sincere. Critical thinking, social media literacy needs to be taught. What about journalistic literacy? What about reading the article? What about reading the data set? What about methodology? I swear, I saw somebody here that was just like, yeah, this one. No one gave a fuck about the truth since the original phone call about Kim was leaked. She wasn't whacked enough. The Maddie Healy allegations once they stopped dating. Her being a Democrat ever since 174 years ago. The false CO2 emissions, all they care is to take her down. What do you mean false CO2 emissions? Where was it ever disproven that Taylor Swift emits what she emits? They're just throwing all types of things in here, right? Doing all of this because Rolling Stone of all publications published a shoddy article. And we already know that Rolling Stone is sus. Rolling Stone is the same publication that just fired two really solid journalists, including Andre G, who was writing good hip-hop and political analysis. Rolling Stone is the same publication that gave Life of a Showgirl a 100 out of 100. Okay? Written by a Swiftie was the article. 5 out of 5. And there were multiple ones. Maya Georgie wrote this article. Maya Georgie in front of a poster full of Taylor Swift flyers. Rob Sheffield, noted Swiftie, gave the previous album, Tortured Poets Department, a 100 out of 100, a 5 out of 5, labeled it an instant classic. So two of her most controversial albums, even among Swifties, given 5 out of 5 by Rolling Stone, a publication that previously was hesitant to give out 4s. When Life of a Showgirl came out, the front page of Rolling Stone was decked out in Taylor Swift media. It was Taylor Swift themed. It was Life of a Showgirl themed, all in celebration of this release. How could anybody think that this is not coordinated with her team at all? I have inside experience as a music journalist in my past. I've had conversations with editors that are like, hey, this person, this artist is a friend of the publication. Can you do this quick write-up and give it just like a little positive review, this new song that they put out? This happens in so many different directions all the time. It's the state of the music industry. And Rolling Stone has simply come out as the most favorable towards Taylor Swift because that way it can maintain a good relationship with Taylor Swift so it can get access and exclusives on her behalf and drive a lot of traffic towards Rolling Stone on her behalf while they're getting rid of serious critical journalists. But just to give you guys some perspective on the space bots as a concept are taking up in our discourse, let's compare this or contrast this with a conversation about Nick Fuentes. So this is from the New York Post, not a very reputable publication, that says Nick Fuentes, as everybody knows, white nationalist, Nazi. The real source of his sudden rise was foreign bots. And they link this research paper by the National Contagion Research Institute. Now, the National Contagion Research Institute is a pretty pro-America organization that is backed, and I'm going to get you guys this Network Contagion Research Institute. The Network Contagion Research Institute is university backed. It trains students. It is an actual academic organization that focuses on particular pillars of impact. It's an advocacy organization. It is also pretty pro-America. At one point, this paper makes reference to, how Nick Fuentes supports authoritarian regimes in China and Russia, right? But look at how it lays out its evidence for bot usage and coordination for Nick Fuentes' influence. Executive summary, right? Algorithmic amplification far exceeds legitimate reach. Fuentes received dramatically higher early retweet velocity than any comparator, including Elon Musk, the platform's most followed user. Within the critical first 30 minutes, Fuentes routinely outperformed accounts with 10 to 100 times more followers. You have evidence. You have specific comparisons. You have a specific metric, early retweet velocity. And then you have more. Early engagement is dominated by repeat actors. In a sample of 20 recent posts, 61% of Fuentes' first 30-minute retweets came from accounts that retweeted multiple of these 20 posts within that same ultra-short window. Behavior highly suggestive of coordination and automation. Now look at the Gudea paper, right? Look at the Gudea paper's executive summary. A multi-layered structure in the dataset in which cultural commentary, political accusations, symbolic interpretation, and conspiratorial narratives intersect. Less than 4% exhibited non-typical behavior amplifiers and accounted for 28% of the conversation volume, suggesting coordinated influence. This is what they use to describe coordinated influence. Now compare that with this. In a sample of 20 recent posts, 61% of Fuentes' first 30-minute retweets came from accounts that retweeted multiple of these 20 posts within that same ultra-short window. Behavior highly suggestive of coordination or automation. Specific evidence, specific data from an academically backed institution, not an AI startup that did one thing and sent it to Rolling Stone. They have more. The amplification network is overwhelmingly anonymous and ideologically dedicated. Look, real background information on the outliers at play. 92% of repeat early retweeters were fully anonymous, no real name, photo, location, contact info, and the majority are openly or functionally single-purpose Groyper/America First accounts, okay? So they tracked the behavior and then they explained to us what kind of behavior it is that happens on these accounts. More background information about that specific amplification. Foreign origin amplification dominated Fuentes' viral posts. Roughly half of the retweets in the months before Charlie Kirk's death, roughly half of the retweets on Fuentes' most viral posts came from foreign accounts heavily concentrated in India, Pakistan, Nigeria, Malaysia, and Indonesia. These regions have no organic link to Fuentes' politics, but do match the known geographic footprint of low-cost engagement farms, making the pattern consistent with bot farm amplification rather than genuine foreign audiences. They're specifically claiming what kind of inauthentic engagement it is. It's bot farms. And they know this because they tracked the locations that the bots are from, and they're specifically from locations which not only have nothing to do with American white nationalism and would be the target targets of American white nationalism in terms of the ethnic background of the people inhabiting them, but are the places where we know there are low-cost engagement farms that people hire to do this kind of inauthentic posting, this kind of inauthentic engagement. This is what evidence looks like. Again, compare that with this. Inauthentic narratives triggered authentic conversations. The inauthentic Taylor Swift is a Nazi narrative acted as a catalyst for a secondary authentic conversation comparing Swift to Kanye West. They give you no data about what this Taylor Swift is a Nazi narrative comes from to prove why it's inauthentic. They just say because it's false, they've rendered it false, it's an inauthentic narrative. Message mapping. Look, they put high-risk clusters of low, medium, and high-risk categories. High-risk clusters were Nazi symbolism and conspiracy accusations, political reframing and MAGA allegations, relationship politicization, Kelsey and NFL. All stuff that we know comes from non-bot accounts, especially these latter two. There's no description, again, of conspiracy accusations, what that actually means. These are the clusters seeded heavily by non-typical accounts and drove downstream effects. Compare that with this. Compare that with the data, the engagement, the locations, the background information, the peripheral information that they got for the Nick Fuentes one. Now do you see the problem? And on top of all of that, on top of the fact that there's way less given to verify, to back these accusations of this coordinated attack on Taylor Swift in comparison to someone like Nick Fuentes, we still know that Nick Fuentes has a bunch of actual support. This data would still not be a reflection that the entire Groyper movement, pro-Fuentes movement, or adjacent movement is inauthentic, is started by bots and consisting only of bots. We see real life examples of this, like the guys that were arguing with Mehdi Hassan on Jubilee. Real examples of people who have this kind of politics, who support these kinds of influencers. So even with this significant evidence, way overshadowing, way outdoing it's the supposed evidence about coordinated attacks using bots on Taylor Swift, it still doesn't mean that Nick Fuentes and his support is completely inorganic and shouldn't be taken seriously or ignored. Whereas the claim, on the other hand, is because we found this very poorly evidenced, and through the evidence we've given very minimal, inauthentic engagement about Taylor Swift and her politics, that means that the best thing to do is ignore it because it doesn't exist, it's not real, whenever you see it come up, it's not real. And this is the conversation that I need to have with you guys right now. We're an hour in, and this is where the analysis has to get a little bit deeper. Because guys, bots are real, bots are taking up a lot of space, the internet is inshitifying, and yet, people are just using that as an excuse to downplay anybody that disagrees with them as a bot. The same way that they've been doing with the fake news thing years ago, the same way that they've done with like all types of different signifiers of fakery on the internet. Bots are now emerging as a real problem and also as this discursive tool, this easy tool I can use to dismiss anything that seems sus to me as being bots, as being AI, as being inauthentic, coordinated attacks. You will find, if you look at the bots on the internet, that sometimes they agree with you. Sometimes the bots are being hired by the Democratic Party. We know that inauthentic engagement, based on the reporting of Taylor Lorenz for Wired, is being fomented within the Democratic Party internet, so that certain influencers that are coordinating with the Democratic Party are being paid to push certain narratives friendly towards Democratic politicians and avoiding specific criticisms that the left has of Democrats. And there are all types of ways in which inauthentic misinformation campaigns are waged by higher actors. And yet, that doesn't excuse you from just completely disengaging from discourse. It teaches you that you gotta be really wary, first of all, of how much you are centering your understanding of the world and your understanding of discourse on the internet. That part is true. But also, you have to be very wary of the fact that at the end of the day, the evidence is what matters. The points, the logic, and the evidence are what matter. So even if 90% of the posts about Taylor Swift being right-wing are bots, which we know is absolutely not the case, it's the complete opposite. Even if you support Goudea's research, it's the complete opposite. If you find one person who makes a compelling case for Taylor Swift having right-wing politics, that does not undermine their argument. But we live in this environment now where, because we are seeing so much grifting, so much botting, so much inauthentic discourse, we've almost resigned ourselves to taking sides based off of vibes. We've resigned ourselves to, well, this is misinformation because it feels like misinformation. Well, these are bots because they feel like bots. And the left online discourse, it's this person's CIA because this feels like CIA. As TYLR says, did the bots also stream her album, her record-breaking #1 album? Literally nothing people are saying about Taylor Swift are even new critiques. There are bots streaming all of your favorite artists. It is a common record label technique to have bot farms. How many times have we heard people low-key referring to people faking their streams? So if you want to have the bot argument, you got to have it neutral of any particular affiliation you have on the internet, because the bots lurk in all corners. And to me, I think this is really indicative of a turning point, or a fork in the road, where you can either use this as a reason to really critically think more than you ever have, and to focus on being self-critical in the face of reasonable arguments that you even disagree with, or completely going down the rabbit hole of comfort and associating with points and ideas that make you comfortable. It's a turning point. It's a fork in the road for that. Discourse integrity is something that we've never really had online. There was never a point in time in the past where you could look back and we're like, yeah, back in those days, everybody was really who they were and you could trust them. I get that it's in some ways worsening because of the proliferation of these bots, but there was always flagrant inauthenticity on the internet. We are always performing to some degree, even me. And there are always people among us who are out here for, social credit, who are out here for likes and retweets. There are people out here who are paid to be here. And so sometimes the enshittification narrative can become a bit anti-intellectual because it makes us think, well, the internet used to be so good. It used to be such an environment for discourse. Now it's so much worse because of Gen Z, or it's so much worse because of new technology. When actually the opportunities for you to get self-reflective and have good critical discourse are still there. They're still there. But it's so much easier to just say, well, there's a bunch of bots. So that's what it really is. You have always been influenced. And I think the Rolling Stone case is a perfect example. You are always being influenced. The music industry has always had significant industry pull over the music journalism industry. The music industry, the movie industry, the celebrity industry, the political industry, all of them have significant power over newspapers, what kind of stuff you saw in newspapers in the 80s and 90s, what you saw on network television, what you saw depicted in media, got milk commercials. Like, all of this stuff has been used to program us. This is not new. It's just more ridiculous now. And you have to make sure you outline that in your head, because it's so easy to fall into a reactionary narrative where, oh, I long for the America of 2005. The America of 2005 was just as deluded, is that the term? Misinformed, carried by poorly argued narratives. The internet was bad when we were kids. It has always been a battleground upon which different actors vie for control, including us, right? Including us as people who are just trying to engage and use the internet to connect with other people, to better the world, to better our situation, etc. I do not have Letterboxd. At some point, would you be able to talk about Netflix buying everything and shaming the whole movie industry right now? I might talk about that at some point. It might come up in different conversations I have, and I don't know a ton about the movie industry, so that's why I don't usually talk about that. This is also a great example because, yeah, Rolling Stone is a publication that is literally, we can prove, is not operating with integrity. So it's so easy to be like, well, Rolling Stone, an actual publication and an actual journalist are reporting this, not these stupid bots online and in our comment sections. But the Rolling Stone editors are bots too, right? They're just as inauthentic of an actor as random accounts popping up posting narratives about Taylor Swift, because they're trying to push narratives about Taylor Swift and they're doing so for their own gain. This was always the case. And then it's the data, right? There is this aura around, oh, this data has been presented to us. Look at this data. And like, it's very hard to do the work to constantly critically analyze data that were presented and look at the methodology and look at the evidence given, look at the conclusions made and say, okay, I agree with this, I disagree with this, I have some questions about this study, etc. But in a case like this, some shady AI tech company that barely exists just pulled the wool over a ton of people's eyes online, all because they've put out a paper and they have a couple of numbers and statistics that they point to. And you're so focused on being correct that you don't even look at what those numbers are or those terms that they're using. You don't even read the paper for yourself and assess the methodology. You don't even go, well, that phrasing is kind of weird, or why does this article seem like it's advertising this company, or 4%, just 4%? None of that resonates in your head, because instead of evaluating the information for yourself and the logic for yourself, you just go, see, thing with legitimacy says I'm correct. And in that way, that's bot behavior. That's bot behavior. So a lot of the time, the bots are perfectly human, perfectly regular people with opinions you disagree with. And so they're not bots at all. But what we have to really be mindful of, and sometimes afraid of, are the ways that we can fall for things. And that doesn't always mean the things that make us comfortable, the narratives and the information that make us comfortable. Sometimes that means that our faves are getting critiqued fairly. Sometimes that means that publications that we used to rely on are no longer trustworthy. Sometimes that means that we don't have to be defensive. And one last point about critical thinking, because, some people are correctly pointing out in the chat, a lot of us are not taught to critically or closely read nowadays, especially young people. I would argue that has long been the case. Our systems of education have always been programming us, especially since the early 20th century, but way before a lot of us were even born, including our parents. Taylorism in the education sector became the mechanism through which the education system in the United States in particular pushed out specific types of robotic type of workers, right? Who knew less and less and were encouraged to critically think less and less, but were instead encouraged to have the take that other people agree with and then called that critical thinking, called that close reading. The education system has never been a reliable source of critical thinking and close reading. Our concepts of literacy have always been biased. Our concepts of what are true and false have always been influenced by the state, influenced by elites, by capital. And so now we're in an opportunity where we don't have to just be this runaway train on a ticket to nowhere. We don't have to just be looking at our situation right now as doomsday every single day, as everything getting worse. We can actually use this opportunity to say, let's liberate ourselves a little bit. Now that it's so clear that everything is coded in a layer of bullshit, now that it's so clear how deceptive all these different actors are, how much self-interest plays into everything, now we have an opportunity to learn about the world in a whole new way. Prioritizing evidence, enhancing our ability to read, to speak different languages, communicating with people around the world, measuring personal experience with empirical evidence, analyzing the empirical evidence, understanding where methodology can fail. All that stuff is available to us. But if we just keep settling for this, oh, everybody's a bot, oh, it's just a bunch of bots, we're going to be the doomsday that we fear. If that makes sense.